Good morning and welcome to this session, all aboard building a more diverse and equitable transport workforce. My name is Geraldine de Bastian. I'm the CEO of a company called Connective, and I'm very honored to moderate this morning's session. So, as we know, and as you've probably discussed over the course of the last days, creating a net zero and carbon economy needs to go hand in hand with inclusive and just social transition. It needs to be guided by the principle of leaving no one behind. That's also important in the context in looking at the workforces, where also no one should be left behind. Therefore, it is important to debate how to build an equitable and inclusive workforce in the transport sector, what skills and professions will be needed in future, what will be good cutoff points between humans and machines in the era of automation, and how can employers really provide good working conditions in terms of pay and stability. Those are some of the questions we're looking forward to debating on this panel, and I'm looking forward to welcoming and introducing our distinguished panelists to you in a moment. I would just like to also say that we're very much looking forward to discussing these questions with you as well, and we'll make plenty of time for audience participation, so please do let me know if you have comments and interventions or questions that you would like to address to the panel. So now I'd like to introduce the panelists to you. Starting to my right, I'd like to warmly welcome Alette van Leur, who is the Director of the Sectoral Policies Department, Sector, at the International Labour Organization, ILO, in Geneva. Sector works really across all four strategic objectives of the ILO's work agenda, promotes decent work and productive employment in 22 social and economic sectors and industries. The department contributes to the ILO's work on the promotion of decent work in global supply chains, as well as the implementation of the Century Declaration of the Future of Work and the Global Call to Action for a Human-Centered Recovery after the COVID-19 crisis that we're still sort of in. Welcome, Alette.
Thank you.
We have an energizing applause for our speakers as I welcome them. Next up, I would like to welcome Bruno Batista Barros Martins, who is the Executive Director of the National Transport Confederation, CNT, responsible for the planning and execution of more than 445 national studies and research technical themes, including economics and statistics, carried out by CNT in Brazil since 2001. He is also responsible for developing and conducting environmental research projects and has promoted the structuring of the environmental program of Transport Despolia, which was recognized by the UN in 2020 and has benefited carriers across the country since 2007. Welcome, Bruno. To my far right, I would like to welcome Stephen Cotton, who's the General Secretary of the International Transport Workers Federation, ITF, a global union federation that represents nearly 670 or more trade unions, representing over 80 million workers in 154 countries in the maritime, port, road, rail, aviation, and urban transport sectors. He was elected to the position of the 34th ITF Congress held in Sofia, Bulgaria in 2014, and re-elected in Singapore in 2018. Welcome, Steve. Last but not least, to my left, I would like to welcome Alberto Masola, who is the Executive Director of the Community of European Railway and Infrastructure Companies, CER, and has been in that position since January 2001. He represents its members toward the EU policymakers and advocates rail as a backbone of competitive and sustainable transport systems in Europe. Alberto holds a master's in business administration, a doctorate cum laude in nuclear engineering from University in Milan. I'm sorry. His past roles have included head of international government affairs and cabinet member of Italy's state holding minister, advisor to the Romanian Minister of Industry, and contributing to the world business sections of Leonardo Fermentazione. Alberto Masola is also active in the European Economic and Social Committee since 2015. Welcome very much, Alberto. Excuse my poor language skills in Italian. So let me just briefly introduce the format of the session. We're going to start off with a round of short introductory statements to allow our panelists to outline their areas of work in a bit more detail to you. And then we will jump in a moderated Q&A session. So I will be posing questions to the panel, but then we'll also shortly after open up for your questions and comments. So please do let me know if you'd like to make an intervention. And as we're a small group, let's make this a lively discussion with everybody in the room today. And with that, I would like to welcome you, Alette, to give your opening remarks, please.
Thank you so much. Is this working? Yeah, it's working. Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Thank you, Gerardine, for these introductions. And I would like to, first of all, thank ITF for inviting the ILO to this forum, but also to this particular panel. Because as you know, the workforce is very close to our hearts, and we are happy that there is also space to discuss the most important of all elements in transport, and that is, of course, its transport workers. So the ILO, let me first, for those of you that are not familiar with the International Labour Organization, it's the oldest, we are very proud, the oldest of the UN agencies, and established in 1919. And it's very special in terms of its composition because it's also the only UN agency that is tripartite in terms of membership. 187 member countries, but also workers. So that's why I was applauding so loudly, because I have to keep friends with my friend Steve, of course, the unions, but also the employers. ILO is about decent work. ILO is about social justice, the promotion of social justice. And of course, work is now our, what shall we call it, our trademark perhaps, to describe how we promote social justice. Employment, social protection, rights at work is a very important element in that, and particularly also social dialogue and tripartite consultations is what we do every day and all day, and it's not always fun, but we always say tripartism is sometimes a mixed blessing. It is what we believe in, it is what we are discussing with workers, employers and governments to advance workers' rights, but also sustainable enterprises. And I was just referring to it as a mixed blessing. It's sometimes a big fight. I can tell you that we have had quite dramatic fights between workers and employers, as you can imagine, and governments play their part in that fight as well. But then once there is an agreement, it is cast in stone, and that is so important. So decent work, social justice, and the rights at work of all those workers around the world that need our protection. So this is in a short time span what the ILO is about, and I will come to more details in a minute. And as you have already introduced the Sectoral Policies Department, what we do is promote decent work, but then through a sectoral lens in 22 different socio-economic sectors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alette, for the setting of the scenes. I'm looking forward to getting in a bit more detailed conversation about your work at ILO in a few minutes. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Alberto for your opening comments, please.
Thank you. I would like also to thank the organizers for inviting the community of European railways and infrastructure companies to this meeting. Who are we and why are we here participating to this discussion today? The association is representing essentially 90% of railway undertakings operating in Europe and about 70% of the infrastructure managers that we have here in Europe. So representing more than 25th country in the European Union, plus some associated membership or partners, including UK, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Israel, and Norway and Switzerland. So countries part of the Eastern Partnership in the relation with the European Union, as well as the EFTA. What is our purpose is promoting, of course, railways in Europe, sustainable transport, and in the activities that we have undertaken recently, we just closed it last year, we have been able to sign an agreement with trade unions in Europe concerning women in rail. One specificity of this agreement in the Treaty of the European Union, there is a possibility that social partners in specific domain are able to finalize agreements, and these agreements are legally binding. So it's a sort of, normally in the procedure is parliaments that decides laws, and, but in the specific point of social matters, there is a possibility inside the European Union that employers and trade unions are able to finalize agreements, and then or they are approved by the Council of Ministers and then become directly law, or in any case are legally binding, and partners are bound to apply this agreement. So we just signed this last year after 3 years of discussion. During COVID it was also a bit difficult, but we were very, I would say, glad to be able to sign it. Why we did it? Because railways are suffering, as many sectors, shortage of staff. One point. Second point, we have also gender gap. Only 21% of the persons working in railways are women. Of course, country from country is slightly different inside the European Union, but this is the average. So out of 1 million people working in railways, more than almost 200,000 are women. The other point that we have also in railways is also an age gap. So many people are approaching retirement age, and we need to, railways, European railways are looking for new staff joining the railways, and maybe this is the final comment. But you are making about digital and what we need in the future.
Thank you so much, Alberto. That definitely also already gives some good pointers for some of the challenges being faced at the moment and how you're working toward resolving them. Yes, looking forward to getting back to that in a minute as well, but now over to Stephen, please.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm not sure we were the top of the bill this morning, but thank you for coming so early. I hope we give you a stimulating session. So, the introduction, we represent 18 million workers. I think throughout the COVID period, we recognised that we had to re-engineer and redirect ourselves. So we've got 4 core themes at the moment. One is occupational health and safety, which underpins all of the transport modes, whether they carry cargo or passenger. We also are looking at a sustainable future, and what does that mean? And we'll cover that in a bit more detail. For us, the supply chain has been highlighted throughout COVID as critical to societies, and of course, we've seen lots of challenges, whether it be container ships, blockages of ports, lack of truck drivers, you name it, and ultimately the future of work. So I think we see that all of the elements that we're going to discuss today are pinpointed. But we have to be very honest, and certainly from a union perspective, we're not as good as we should be when it comes to gender, and many of our unions are male-dominated. We have to start from a point of honesty that it's crazy that we don't recognise that women and the contribution of women should be a fundamental point. So in the ITF, we've been looking for a number of years about how do we make the workplace more attractive, more inclusive, and I hope today we will find some common ground with the rest of our colleagues. I think for us also that question of the image of transport when it comes to young workers as well. So these are issues that we believe are union issues, and we'll come through the session about how can we work together with regulators, governments, and employers to make transportation as attractive as it needs to be ready for all of the challenges. And just on the final point, I think the ITF is over 100 years old. Probably the challenges we have about zero emissions, making our workplaces attractive, are some of the biggest challenges the transport sector faced throughout our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of you for those opening statements and giving us some food sort of to speak to kick off the course of the conversation now. You heard some of your fellow panelists already outline the key challenges that they're working on. Maybe I can... Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Bruno. I'm so sorry. Obviously, we have a 4th panelist and a 4th opening statement. I wanted to jump right into the discussion there, but we need to hear from you and the very important work you're doing, especially also at the intersection of environmental factors and social factors. So please, over to you, Bruno, for your opening statement.
All right. Thank you, Geraldine. I'd like to salute my colleagues here. And first of all, I'd like to thank ITF and our Secretary Kim for inviting CNT so we can be here today to discuss these very important themes. So I assume that you don't know what CNT is, then I'm going to talk a little about it. CNT is the Brazilian National Transportation Confederation. We represent over 160,000 companies of all transport modes. We are located in Brasilia, our main capital, and we developed lots of projects related to the environment situation in Brazil. We are based on a multi-level framework. On the basis, we have the transport companies. They join into unions or syndicates. Above them, we have the regional federations, and above these federations, we have CNT, which is the National Confederation. It's important to mention that for some specific items, only CNT can speak in behalf of the whole sector, and that happens especially when we are dialoguing with the government. And so, among several other activities, CNT has the largest environmental program led by private sector in our country. It's called Programa Despoluir. It can be translated as a depolluting program, and we're really happy because next July it will complete 15 years of activities. We have achieved lots of environmental goals during this period, and I'll be happy to share some of these projects with you a little bit further. Then our purpose is to promote the improvement of quality of life of our workforce, and we do this by engaging them into social and environmental responsible activities, and that's been produced through our different projects. Our vision is to be the main initiative that contributes to the sustainable development of the transport sector in Brazil. Then we can summarize that what we've been doing along these 15 years is trying to engage the workforce and the company's managers in order to show them and sometimes to convince them that they are the really game changers when we talk about sustainability in transport sector. Then it's been a hard task, but our numbers make us believe that we are in the right path.
Great, thank you. And I would very much like to, of course, hear more of the examples of what the outcomes of those measures have been. Let's start by just recapping sort of the basics and departing from the point of the challenges that you're facing. You've heard your fellow panelists outline some of those from their perspectives, from the perspectives of their workforces that they're representing. Looking at it sort of from a global scale and ILO perspective, what would you say are the key challenges at the moment in terms of bringing existing transport workforces into this just transition, and especially in light of the challenges faced through climate change and digitization?
Thank you very much. But if I may I first touch upon another point, and that is the international labor standards, if you don't mind, and of course that's very much related to the question you have asked. So the theme of this panel is a more diverse, equitable transport workforce. We already heard Steve say that all of the various transport sectors suffer basically from labor shortages, perhaps they are not as diverse and inclusive as all of us would want to. And of course, the solution to that, in our view, in ILO's view, is to improve conditions of work, as you have also highlighted. So how do we do this at the ILO? We have a huge body of international labor standards, and that is international labor conventions and international labor recommendations. And I believe the convention, the score is at the moment 190 different conventions. Recommendations, we are at 206, hopefully 207 by the end of the month of June, because there's going to be another recommendation adopted, and this is on apprenticeships. No, I'm wrong, that will be next year, but the first reading is this year on apprenticeships, which is so relevant also in this context. So basically, if I may, I will not list all of the list all of the international labor conventions and recommendations that we have, but basically they cover more or less 4 different themes. One is equality, a more inclusive workforce. all of the international labor standards that promote non-discrimination, of course, but also respect for diversity. There's lots of them on gender, race, ethnicity, indigenous status, disability, HIV status. We have quite a few of those recommendations and conventions that promote those. And actually relating this to the transport sectors. I believe that in a couple of countries, and not far from here, women were not allowed to drive trucks or even, and I don't even know if women are allowed to drive trains. How many female pilots are there in the world at the moment? There's a lot of work to be done. And also, we promote, and I've heard this luckily in the last 3 days quite a bit when speaking about diverse and equitable transport sectors. We also promote not just women, although that's, thank you so much for your comments again, Steve, but that's super important, but also we need to look also at these more diverse workforces in terms of migrants. I know it's a controversial topic, but we have to cover these labor shortages because we need transport workers. I think everyone agrees on that. Also people with disabilities. Let's also start looking at neurodiverse groups, which is a topic that really should be rising to the top of the agenda in our view because it has been ignored in the past. Of course, youth. We need to provide, particularly during COVID-19. I personally believe that youth have been suffering more than any other groups, and we need to just provide for youth and try to see if they could be interested in helping the world's mobility. I heard Wednesday, Mr. Pete Buttigieg say that transport can connect and transport can divide. And this is absolutely also the case in multiple, from multiple facets. We can look at that. So youth, but also the elderly. We need to provide for people that actually could be very happy in forming part of the transport workforce. Other conventions are, of course, these conventions and recommendations that build an equitable workforce. I've already referred to apprenticeships, but skills. And in this digitalized world, we need to really see how we can forecast what skills are needed for the future. I believe that we come to another Do the Future of Work a bit later. Skills, but also just decent employment patterns, and also training and in an inclusive and diverse manner. I would also like to refer to the huge body of sectoral standards and guidelines and codes of practice we have. The last one that was adopted is a guideline on the promotion of decent work and road safety, and we heard that a lot, and I brought one copy. Well, okay, luckily there's more than one person in the audience today, but one copy, but of course everything is available on our website. We also have and we are very proud of that, and again, Steve knows it very well, the Maritime Labour Convention, which is the Bill of Rights of seafarers, combining something like 162 different conventions and recommendations into one really important convention. We also have driving time for road transport and all kind of guidelines, including on the railway sector. ILO is very ambitious when it comes to the railway sector. We believe that also in the discussion on a just transition towards sustainability, of course, the railway sector could perhaps play a role, and we need to look at that. So we are very much looking forward to working with you also, Mr. Masola, to see how we can advance the railway sector. And now last but not least, and then I stop, I promise you, the fundamental principles and rights at work. No child labor, no discrimination, no forced labor, freedom of association, collective bargaining. Those are, at the moment, the 4 pillars of the fundamental principles and rights at work. the very special characteristic of these so-called FPRWs, as we call them, Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, are that member states do not need to ratify these underlying conventions. These conventions, these core conventions, apply to all workers in the world, regardless of whether they have been ratified by member states or not. And that's really, it has a huge impact and has provided protection, including also guidance towards a more diverse and equitable transport workforce. And last but not least, it's very special that during the forthcoming International Labour Conference in June, it starts actually at the end of this week, the International Labour Conference of this year, we hope that tripartite constituents, workers, employers and governments will agree to include safe and healthy working conditions, safe and healthy working environments into these fundamental principles and rights at work. Again, governments do not need to go through ratification processes and national legislation procedures to ensure that each and every worker in the entire world has the right to be protected and to be provided with a safe and healthy working environment. And that's actually, it's a huge step forward, and we hope that, of course, also under the pressure of COVID, as all of us have seen what has happened there, of course, that safety and health becomes really one of those core issues that the ILO would promote. Mm-hmm. I'll stop here. Again, I would like to refer to the ILO website where you can find more information on these conventions and recommendations, and particularly also how to promote a more diverse and equitable transport workforce. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alette. So I would, of course, be interested to understand more how these frameworks that you're putting forward are being used also and informing the work, for instance, of you, Stephen, and of you, Alberto. How is this connected to then the next steps that you take within these frameworks?
Thanks, Alette. I think we have to start by, again, acknowledging as an industry, and I want to break passenger transport and freight transport into two groups. Transportation is too cheap in the sense that because we've been in a very competitive market, and as we mentioned, we cover every sector. And as you drive costs down, ultimately, the questions about occupational safety and health and competitiveness, cost-cutting become part of the elements. So for the ITF, in order for us to face all of these challenges, we've got to convince our societies, the consumers, the clients of transport, passengers, that we need to move that forward. So that's a fundamental question about how we're going to pay for it. Then the question comes, and again, we can pick up on the tripartism, but also, and this week it's been a very interesting week because there's a lot of common views about we have to meet net zero, but the real question is how do you implement those challenges? So for the ITF, it is based on partnership. So for passenger transport, UITP is the employers groups. We have an extraordinarily good agreement with them, which does pick up on gender equality, changing the environment, safe travel on public transport, the ability for the workers not to be harassed by the passengers. All of these key issues are critically important to change the perception of our industries. And again, I'll let you say it, and I would very much back that in, that we have to create the environment that whether you're a migrant or wherever you fit in society, transport jobs, particularly in the passenger sector, where we can formulate partnership with employers groups, where we can formulate positions with government, we take that position forward. In the... Keep going. Stop.
No, go on.
So in the question of freight, it's even more difficult. And we come to meetings like this, and most of the delegates are very serious about their professional approach. But we could list for you horror stories about seafarers abandoned, and that's because it's transport is part of a speculation to make money rather than to provide a service and give us those challenges. I think COVID taught us, certainly in the ITF, the other ITF, that we have to build trust and partnership with different employers groups. Now, we won't always agree It is our job to improve the life of working men and women, whether it's their terms and conditions. But for us to face these challenges, we have to build inside, and that's where I kind of want to follow on Alette's position. The ILO, by its very culture, and there are tough negotiations, should provide our societies a level playing field about what are the minimum standards. Because in the end, competition should be about efficiency, safety, transition, rather than we're the cheapest and we can deliver you something much cheaper than everywhere else. So you should have level playing fields. And I think the issue of collective bargaining, and I was watching CNN this week and I saw that the American footballers, the women, have got equality when it comes to the prize money for football. And they mentioned collective bargaining. And these are critical issues because collective bargaining is put in place for workers to have a voice with employers, and through the collective bargaining mechanism, you have to put forward all of these issues. So yes, of course, we decide how many hours we work and what is death and disability and all those key issues. But if we're going to confront the future of work and the skills that we need to have, collective bargaining is part of that process. So for us, it's building partnerships with all the employers groups. As I say, we don't always agree. It's having fora where we disagree in an orderly and respectful fashion. But when you come out, you have to have concrete agreements, employment agreements, rules of engagement, which then means everybody's playing by the same rules, and it's not a cost-cutting exercise, it's actually a contribution to society.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'd like to understand how this also relates to the work you're doing and also the agreement that you presented, both in the context of the general ILO standards, but also perhaps to what Stephen has just outlined in terms of creating these more level playing fields through things like collective bargaining powers in your rail workforces.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that as railways, we fully support this idea of level playing field. And we are complaining always that we don't have it. So they say this is a point raised always in the European Parliament, the European Commission, with the ministers in Europe. And we think that, for instance, road transport and rail transport situation is not the same. It's very different. So I would say I fully subscribe these words, and as railways, we are always pushing for that, not just for workers and so, also for business conditions, because we need to compete in many cases, especially with road and freight transport. Say, in passenger situation is different, in passenger transport, I would say. In terms of ILO, I don't think that we have anything to add on the convention. We applied on the convention in Europe, so I was part, as Economic and Social Committee of the International Trade Committee, we were very much supporting the application of ILO convention in any trade agreement. Going back to railways, I think getting to the point of our agreement, let's say, first of all, it's not the railways were not doing anything. Mm-hmm. So many of our companies were already developing HR policies in order to, say, be more attractive and being able also to promote more women when they are working in the company. So this is something that was underway well in advance, so since 2010 and more. But what we did last year is to make it, say, legally binding. That's a big difference. So we engage ourselves and also trade unions, let me say, because there are some also aspects that are applying to trade unions, the same. So what I will quote some of them should be applied in the companies, but we ask also trade unions that they apply inside their organization because, as you were referring, it's good to see even more women in front of us when we discussed in these agreements. So the points that we made, we attach many policy areas, so 8 policy areas. In each of them, we have something which is compulsory, that we need to be done, plus some good practices that we would like to see applied, and each one should be pushed for that. I start for some examples. First of all, measures. So what we would like to have is statistics, clearly statistics reporting everywhere, so that we can see the evolution year by year, and we can see the results of our policies. Then also including, next step, quantitative targets. So companies should have in their policy, HR policies, quantitative targets to achieve in terms of women presence in their company so that we can not just monitor, but also engage into achieving some of these results. I will quote only a few of them, not all, because otherwise it becomes too long. Then we have how to attract women. So here, both in terms of communication to the external world, as well as transparency in job advertisement, selection process. So we have different points where we will address and being able to attract more women in our activities. Reconciliation of public and of working and private life. So for instance, when you go on maternity leave, you will be considered as being working in the sense that your career will not suffer anything. So you will be treated as if you were working as a male, or you have also paternity leave. Paternity and maternity leave will be treated as people who were working in their normal life. So we have promotion and career development, equal pay, and addressing the gender gap. On that we are being more restrained because there is a directive in the discussion in the European Union, so we will apply it. Implementation prevention policy, health and safety, as well as dignity in the workplace. Let's say beyond this, there are some stereotypes in the society. So it's not that our trade agreement will solve everything. We need also to be able to address, also in the school, for instance, in education, some stereotypes about the work and the role of women in our companies. Mm-hmm. This is something we will not solve, but I think we need to address. We have taken some initiatives. I would say all of our companies, more or less railways is about between number 1 and number 3 employers in each country, at least in Europe. So it's one of the biggest companies in terms of employment. We have taken initiative also in universities, in school, in grammar school, and so on. But let's say it's also a society challenge. Yeah. So because if we don't start there, it's difficult to recover when you are 20 or 25. So this is another challenge. It's for society a challenge. But we are engaging ourselves, but let me say we are not enough in this sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you very much. And obviously it needs different components and different actors to come together to make sure these frameworks that you're putting in place then are brought to life, so to speak, especially if we're looking at rail, setting some of the challenges during COVID times and some of the tensions in between society. You could have the best practice settings in place and there would have still been many people probably in rail workforces not feeling comfortable or feeling vulnerably threatened in many situations. So those challenges will remain and require different approaches. But let me first bring in Bruno, because I would very much like to understand, firstly, this image problem that Stephen talked about. How is this in Brazil, and how are you also addressing this through some of the programs that you're running?
Oh, thank you. Of course, we are always worried about labor shortages. We've been trying to change the perception that transport workers, especially when they are driving trucks, it's a harsh situation. From our point of view, this professional is not attracting youngsters anymore, and that's a huge problem for us. In CNT, we have the good habit to make planning based on our surveys. They rely us to implement good practices. We made a profile research, a profile survey a few years ago, and we realized that only 1% of the total professionals in transport sector in Brazil are women.
1%?
1%.
Wow, okay, that is a big gender gap.
And that's what we've been working with companies to stimulate them to hire women. But the main aspect that I would like to highlight is that previously we have to do a project related to knowledge dissemination. Mm-hmm. The success of the environmental program in Brazil can only be achieved with joining forces with companies and especially self-employed truck drivers, for them to understand how important they are in the system. One of these surveys that I've mentioned, we have realized, for instance, that there was a weight problem. And we're not talking about overweighting the trucks, but the professionals, they were getting fat because they didn't have access to good information of what to eat. They didn't find good quality food along the roads. Then we started giving them information about it. And now we are launching a project pilot to certify some restaurants alongside the roads so they can easily identify nice places to eat. Then, from our point of view, there are lots of challenges that must be solved in order to make transport careers more attractive. And we've been doing some of these projects alongside our Despoluir program.
Do you want to share some of the results of the program, some of the good practices that have come out of it?
Okay. Well, the origin of the program was when we started realizing something like 15 or 16 years ago that especially bus drivers, they were getting sick because of the air pollution. We have a situation in Brazil. It's a big country. By then, we were talking about 200 million people, 85% of them living in urban areas. And unfortunately, we don't have this structure already established. And we depend too much on buses and trucks to deliver goods and to move people in our big cities. And we have really big cities like São Paulo with 14 million people, Rio de Janeiro with 9 million people living together. And we don't have this metro system so developed as we have here in Europe. For instance, the whole length of the metro system and rail systems in our cities totalize 309 kilometers. Tokyo, only the city of Tokyo has more than this. It's less than half of the mileage we have in Shanghai. Mm-hmm. Then we really depend on these people driving in a polluted area. Then we heard a call for action. We started programming this planning. And the first action that we took was the fleet inspection on regular basis. Nowadays we have 180 mobile units covering all Brazilian 27 states with technicians that check the opacity, and we're talking about black smoke, to verify the emissions. We have already carried out more than 3.6 million environmental assessments on vehicles. When we began the program, the level of approval was 71%. Now we have already achieved 89%. And besides that, we've been doing knowledge dissemination because we strongly believe that the success of the program depends on people understanding their role. And for that to make sense, they have to receive some good information about technical good practices. Then we conduct studies, surveys, researches, books, guidelines, and we have published more than 40 studies and disseminated over 260,000 copies among companies and self-employed truck drivers. Then we strongly believe that when they have good information, when they understand their role in the whole industry, and especially when they understand that big changes are coming to transport section, it will be easier for us to attract youngsters to our workforce, and especially women.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, like geographically, those are massive challenges, but it's very interesting to see how you're combating them, especially with this ecological perspective. I mean, just summarizing this challenge part of our conversation now, it seems so painfully obvious that this is what happens when you sell a whole sector just as every little boy's dream and forget about the little girls. So that's one clear problem that is given. But also the mismatch that we generally have in society between the jobs that we need, so vulnerable workers and critical workers, and the pay that they receive for those jobs, in contrast to other jobs in society that are maybe less crucial and critical, and their pay rates. at the same time, we have this need for cheap transportation and cheap public transportation. How do you see, this is picking up on the point that Stephen made, who's going to pay for it? How do you see these dynamics coming together? Where do we create a better pay situation for people in this sector, whilst at the same time keeping the public interest of low costs going?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. I have listened with great interest to so far the introductions. I think we should have a debate now also on these labor shortages and this well, completely lack of gender balance and also lack of diversity in many of the transport sectors and how to address them. Well, the solution is, of course, make it more attractive, improve conditions of work, but also, as I referred to earlier, safety and health. Why would women want to drive trucks if there are such unsafe situations on the roads, in service stations, and so on? And I think really this is you mentioned it, transport may be too cheap. We need to just, the cost for society of cheap transport are even more expensive than increasing the cost of transport. Maybe that's the solution. I'm not quite sure about that. But the reality is that we should also involve governments. Let's not make this a unions and employers situation. Governments have the responsibility to ensure that societies are driven, are mobile, that there is mobility, and for inclusivity. I just referred to these fundamental principles and rights at work. Governments need, really this is an appeal to employers and workers, do not let governments off the hook. They have this responsibility. They are obliged to ensure these rights and these conditions of work for everyone. So that's an important bottom line. Secondly, what we consider also, what is very important in the transport sectors, in other sectors as well, but particularly also in transport, is to really ensure that these sectors become formalized. These informal economies that are still rampant across the world and even have increased during COVID, and we have seen the consequences of that, that's really something that we need to address. Formalization of these sectors with proper conditions of work, through social dialogue, collective bargaining. This is how societies function, involve governments, and make sure, and this is another big appeal, make sure that every person in the entire world has the right to social protection. Social protection is a basic bottom right that should be extended to really everyone in the world. So formalization combined with this basic social protection, and I'm sure that people now are thinking, yes, who's going to pay for that? Well, there's big research and calculation that it doesn't have to be that expensive, and it's affordable. I mean, this world of ours, unfortunately, is a bit crazy at the moment. Priorities are perhaps not where they should be. There's wars, there's COVID that is disrupting societies and the world and supply chains. So we really need to look at redesigning this world of ours, and that's not just the obligation of the employers. I would like to put some emphasis on that, and the unions to lobby for that. So yeah. a big, well, I've heard the word a couple of times during this ITF forum, moral change, a big rethinking of where we go with the world. And that's informality is just not, that doesn't belong in the world of work. Mm-hmm. The other thing is this just transition. Of course, we all speak about carbon neutral and environmental challenges, but what we are lobbying for, and I hope that we all agree on that this transition to sustainable societies and environments, including in this very important transport sectors, should be a just transition, human-centered. We are humans. We have. I don't know if you've had a chance to visit the BMW site, where we have seen more and more robots appearing, and luckily BMW confirmed, well, for the difficult things we need human beings, and that is the future. We are not going to be replaced by robots. Luckily, we need to care for workers. We need to care for employers who make societies go. And again, do not let governments off the hook. They are responsible.
So there were a lot of points. Let's try to tap into all of those. And as you said, they're all interconnected because the public sector is needed for each and every one of these aspects. But yes, as you said, which woman wants to be a truck driver? I was thinking, well, Stephen, like who anybody wants to be a truck driver if you're going to be stuck for weeks in Calais at the border, just as an example, and likely to replace by automated driving in the next 20 years. So let's, before we go into the effects of automation and digitization, which I'd very much like to, there's the one idea about how do you bring new people into the workforce, which we already discussed some points about, and then the idea also of how do you value the jobs of your workers by providing them new skills. So I want to talk about both a little bit, but perhaps first of all, this is obviously not just a campaigning and an HR issue. So how are you addressing such questions and trying to be more open for more new people, the way these different demographies that we've already outlined, not just women, but people, different age groups, different backgrounds, etc.
So there's kind of so much to talk about, and I'll hold off on the just transition and hope we'll come back to that in a moment. But so as I mentioned, the conversation for us is building alliances and a coalition of the willing. So we have UITP. We're working with IRU, which is the Truck Drivers Association. I think we should recognise, very frankly, that the challenges in different transport modes can be quite different. So if we talk about public services at the moment, and we work very closely with the C40 group of mayors, because actually they can get things done sometimes quicker than governments. Probably shouldn't say too much about what I think about governments after some of the COVID experiences we had with transport workers kind of abandoned inside the crisis, particularly seafarers, truck drivers, couldn't cross borders, needed tests that didn't exist, lots of crazy things. And those things need to be addressed because I think for us it's a societal question. And I very much agree with Alette that the coalition, frankly, between unions and employers is probably better than it's been in the past, and the COVID experience has helped us. But then we put in pressure on government to understand what the vision is, because we have to create the vision, we have to create a pathway, because if you want to convince a young woman to take a job in transport, first you have to assure a minimum thing about their personal safety. And again, we could give you so many horror stories about ticket collectors. We're in the whole world, so we could be talking Latin America, we could be talking downtown London, we could be talking India. First, we have to make sure our societies are safe for the people that serve our society. So at the moment, we have a big conversation coming with governments about the cost of public transport. So the return to work, I don't know if everybody in the room haven't seen an avalanche of people coming back to downtown areas and commuting. And now the next question will be is who's going to pay for it? And you'll see challenges throughout our societies about downsizing. And ultimately that means it always seems to end up that workers lose their jobs. So these issues are also part of the conversation. If you want to meet the zero climate challenge, you have to invest in the infrastructure with the right equipment. Talking about freight, we're working on a number of challenges to, again, discreetly with our counterparts in bargaining, to make the clients of transport responsible. So what do I mean by that? The food majors, the automotive companies, the supply chains that are the client who drove the prices down have to have progressive corporate social responsibility strategies that says it's not the lowest denominator, it's the quality of the service. So no slave labour, no child labour, safe environments, and in the end, we anticipate there'll be annual reports on not just your carbon footprint, but also your human rights responsibility in those challenges. So we have to create a bit of a stick and carrot environment. We also have to reach out to governments to be dynamic in this space, have the confidence that people do want a safe planet, and therefore we have to start investing in it. So for us, it is image, it is a cultural challenge, and young people today want a good job, so not a temporary job that they get called to do 3 hours on a Monday and might get called to come to work on a Wednesday. They want to have good, secure jobs. They do want a degree of flexibility. So we're going to have to adapt our jobs to a new way of working. And that conversation maybe has been escalated by COVID. But I can tell you that the working from home strategy doesn't work for transport workers. The world does not move if transport workers are not there on the front line. So we've got a lot of work, and my sort of final point, it must be done in partnership, and we must agree what the framework looks like.
Yeah, thank you. Safety, of course, means physical safety. You also made a point of this earlier, but also physical safety in the sense of environmental safety and not suffering the consequences of being in a very polluted environment. And you also mentioned the same situation with youth not really wanting to uptake this job, which, you know, used to be maybe 20, 30 years ago, a sort of nursery school dream, and now doesn't seem to be that anymore. So maybe you can share a little bit more of how you're addressing, and also the combination of these topics in your programs in Brazil. What sort of future jobs are you thinking about that could reshape the professions that you have today to make it more attractive for youth?
Well, driving a truck in the past, it was an adventurous profession. People covered long distances, knew different cultures, had access to whole new things. But the world has changed. And especially in Latin America, we are living some transition challenges that really gets us worried. New technologies will require new skills. And we have already trained with our current technology more than 28,000 people. But the thing is that the new technologies will change everything. We will have 5G, which is a promise to change our world as we know it. Data analysis will provide new opportunities. And I think that training will be essential for us to create new jobs. Then, from our perspective, we'll have to create everything again, and especially to make companies and self-employed drivers, truck drivers, that they have to come back to school again. They have to be trained, they have to be retrained, because as we can see parked in front of this building, there's a truck that is electrically charged. And there were two different side discussions in this summit. They were called zero-emission trucks keep enrolling, and zero-emission trucks are coming. And we realized that companies, especially, they are not too worried about it, about the changes that are coming. And we're not talking about sci-fi. We're talking about 5 to 10 years we'll have this whole technology. And what we're going to do with our current trucks, only in Brazil we have 1.8 million diesel trucks rolling. And new skills will be definitely required. Then we're trying to get these companies to know a little bit more about these technologies. That's why we produce our technical content and we distribute it freely to them. And on the other hand, we are structuring new courses, new trainings, so we won't have this shortage of jobs, of people wanting to be part of the transport sector.
Allow me a follow-up question. How are you involving the workers in these processes? So I'm assuming there are conversations to find out their needs, but also perhaps to see how they can, contribute to be a part of these planning processes. Is that happening, and can you just outline the process for us a bit?
Yeah, definitely. As I've mentioned, CNT executes lots of surveys. Then, for instance, the last profile survey related to truck drivers was taken place 2 years ago. And then we asked something like 70 different questions of all subjects related to their profession, like where they live, how old they are, their scholarship level, how many days per week they travel, what kind of food they eat, if they have any debt, the characteristics of his trucks. And from these surveys, from these profiles, we always identify some items that we can transform into courses, into training. Then our practical sequences, we do the surveys, then we do project planning, and we validate them with the workforce. Mm-hmm. Is that really what you need to perceive quality in this kind of action? If they say yes, then we do the project pilot, and then we implement it. That's our sequence. Then they are always part of our process.
Yeah, which I'm sure is important in so many ways to make the programs more effective, but also, again, to make them feel valued in their professions. Alberto, I'd like to ask you a similar question. If you're addressing the topic of upskilling or reskilling your workers to give sort of future outlook to their professions, or even the idea of how to combine ideas around lifelong learning with the jobs in your area. How is that working, and how are you also perhaps involving your workforces, rail workers, in such planning processes?
Thank you. Can I comment also on something
please.
you made before?
Yeah.
Because we are discussing about problems, and I think it's true, but I would like also to put something positive, if I may.
Please, very necessary,
So
please.
you were discussing about sustainable, how we can have a sustainable world, sustainable transport, or what we can do that. I would like to bring some experience that we had. Last year was the European Year of Rail. This year is the European Year of Youth. Even though last year we had a lot of COVID, so it was difficult. We managed to organize a train starting in Lisbon, arriving in Paris, and crossing about 27 countries, 120 cities. And let me say, the experience was amazing. In every city that we stopped, we had the mayor, a lot of people, and a lot of people convinced that we should invest more on railways. And we have seen there is a lot of expectations about railways, sustainable transport, how we can improve things, and how we should invest. Let me say also that we have seen also more investments going to railways. So this we see, what does it mean that in the near future, we will see the results of this expectation, because without investment, then it's difficult to see the result. So this is, I would say, there are positive expectations. This year is the European Year of Youth. And on Tuesday, we organized an event in the European Parliament on Interrail. It's a European thing, but we celebrated the 50 years anniversary of Interrail. And we have seen a lot of young people, and now also senior, but was at the origin a young possibility. So people below 26 at the beginning were able to run in all countries by rail, except their own country, with one ticket. This is going on, and we are getting a lot of people, more people traveling on railways, and we propose to European institutions also that when you get 18 years old, you should get an Interrail. This should be your identity, European identity, and we see results. So we didn't get the public funding for all, but at least this year we'll have 70,000 young people that will use it, supported by the European institution. Plus, we have 380,000 young people that are paying on with their. So there are things going on. Why I wanted to say this? Because we see a lot of attention on young people.
Yeah.
So, and we are hiring a lot of people. As I said, we are one of the major employers in each country. Young people are getting close to railways, are willing to be working for railways as a sustainable mode of transport, where also socially recognized that they are bringing some value in what they do. Where is the problem is effective in terms of hiring is on the digital world, because there is a fierce competition. Let's say there are companies that can afford to pay much more.
So you're in competition with other companies offering more, perhaps potentially for young people, attractive jobs with other funding than you can provide.
This is really a key issue, because in fact it's not normal people. When you got in the university in computer sciences and you are trying to get people in competition with.
So perhaps, especially in light of that, what role can upskilling play in this context?
That's very important, what you're mentioning, and we are doing it. Let's say, first of all, we need to go digital.
Yeah.
I want to be very clear, that's the position on our side. We cannot stay where we are. We need to increase our digital content in the railway operation. So railway operation, ticketing, all the activities, control, signaling, and so on. We need to go digital. And we need, as we have also to, I would say, retrain many of the staff that we have. So We cannot stay in the situation where we are and say, looking for new resources, but also the people that are in the companies need to be trained. And we are offering this program. This is very important in order to keep them also in the job, what they are doing, and contribute to development of the company. There are huge programs inside companies to do this. And say they are bringing results, let me say. It is important for us because this is changing. If we want to compete with the other modes, we need to be able to compete on the best terms. And digital will bring a lot of results. It's already bringing results, but will bring even more results on what we are doing, we are planning to do. So upscaling and retraining people in the companies. And a challenging topic is hiring new people exactly in these fields where we need to compete. Everybody's competing, I would say, in getting these resources, and they are limited.
It's interesting because, of course, this is paving your path to the future to be part of this digital transition in general, but it's also interesting because the challenge comes together with part of the solution of perhaps being more attractive employers and more digital, safe environments in future. So, interesting point there. I definitely want to open this up for your questions and comments. So sorry we have been talking away on the panel here. If you would like to make a question or bring in a comment or intervention, please do raise your hand. Don't be shy. This is an open invitation from now on, so I'll keep looking out for your hands. Okay, great. Then we'll take these two, and then I want to get back to the... Do you want to comment very quickly before you...
I'll be very quick.
Sorry, I'll get back to you.
Don't want to cut anybody off, but I think that sort of key question, so workers, current workers, are very concerned about the digitalisation, the changing of their responsibilities. So there's a fundamental need for us to be clear in our communication. So from the ITF's perspective, we do recognise that jobs have to change. But we also recognise, and Alette said it, and thank goodness BMW get it, the point is we have to make sure that the worker knows their job is secure at the end to be ready to take those challenges about upskilling. It's fundamental they have to upskill, but we also have to give them the confidence that they won't be lost, because the resistance is, no, we're not changing. We all know we have to change.
Maybe just a tiny idea of how you're doing it, because like pre-COVID, one of my favorite hobbies used to be to have conversations with taxi drivers on the future of automated driving. And I had the best conversations. Like there's so many great ideas coming from the people who know they might lose their profession to what the future of their profession could look like, from being more in a barkeeper profession, a counselor, to the person driving home, exactly with this idea that we want this humane and human-focused digitization that you were speaking of earlier, Led. So how are you involving them in the conversation?
From our perspective, and I mentioned we're dealing with the future of work as well, you have to recognise that ultimately jobs are a number of tasks, and you have to reassure individuals that there will be tasks, there'll be different tasks, and you use technology to help transition your job, and we have to all believe it, that their job will be better and more rewarding and have a different sense of achievement, because in the end, everybody works for security and money's part of that, but appreciation, COVID's proven to us that people will keep the world moving, so you have to give people that self-value, and it's more social than it is just economic. So there's some big challenges for us.
Yeah, and make them sure they're part of the conversation and not talked about. Right. Please, your question or comment, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My question is for Bruno from CNT. He was mentioning about self-employed drivers, and I wanted to know, in the context of Brazil, how much CNT calculates of the freight movements that are moved by owner-operators or self-employed. What percentage of the freight do you think in Brazil is moved by this workforce? And secondly, I wanted to see if, in the context of Brazil, there's good practices of involving other actors in the chain of contracting of these services. If, for example, the big purchasers of this freight capacity are involved in some way to improve inclusivity in the context of his country. Thank you very much.
Well, let me show a picture of transport in Brazil, a freight transport in Brazil made by trucks. We have something like 100,000 self-employed truck drivers in Brazil. Our surveys show that the education level is really low. They were the pioneers. They were those adventurous guys that 30, 40 years ago, they went to the road and they have faced the huge problems like traveling on unpaved roads, having no place to have food or to sleep properly. And this population nowadays, they are a little bit older. It's hard for them to get another job. They don't have the educational level to move from a truck driver to another profession. Then we are really worried about them. The movement that we have been perceiving is that some companies, they have already started some programs to make these self-employed truck drivers work for them. This happens, in, let's say, in something about 4% of the companies, they hire temporarily these professionals, so they act like a buffer when the demand is high. Instead of buying a new truck, they hire these truck drivers. Then this movement is already taking place. Related to the involvement of other players, we don't see shippers getting too worried about it, especially because as the number of self-employed truck drivers is too high, it makes easier for them to negotiate the prices. Then it's better for them to have more offer, and then they can make the transport with a lower total cost. Then they're not really worried about it, but we are. Especially when we realize that they probably won't find any other profession to move to. Then that's why we invest so much in trainings. It's important to say that CNT has more than 150 units spread all over the country. And these truck drivers, they can they have access to more than 400 different courses. All of them are free of charge. That's an important issue. So we want them to be upskilled, to know a little bit more about computing, because modern trucks, they have computers everywhere, and they haven't even known the basic notions of it. And that's why we promote all these kind of things.
There was another hand raised further in the back. Gentleman, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Olaf Merk, work at the International Transport Forum, the other ITF. I have a question for Alet van Leur. You mentioned the Maritime Labour Conventions. You said this is a great accomplishment. I would generally agree to that. Of course, there is the issue of how to enforce the MLC. Over the last decades, we have seen the development of outsourcing in the shipping sector, with the emergence of open registries, flags of convenience. There have been other mechanisms to compensate for that. Of course, there's port state control. There are also the port inspections of the ITF. But generally, I would think that there still is some sort of a governance gap when it comes to the enforcement of these kind of conventions. Would you agree to that assessment? And if so, what would be ways to possibly solve that?
Thank you so much for that question. This is always a pleasure to report on how the ILO promotes enforcement of ratified international labor conventions and also implementation of international labor recommendations. It's not a boring story at all, don't worry. It's very simple. The ILO and its tripartite mandate, of course, also have a good supervisory mechanism to make sure that the ratified international labor conventions also are implemented, and this is the role of governments, again, these governments, to ensure that these ratified conventions, and in addition to that, the fundamental principles and rights at work that I spoke to earlier, are enforced and are applicable, and they protect each and every worker in the world. We have seen through COVID that many governments have really let go of that obligation. Particularly, you mentioned the Maritime Labour Convention. We are actually now in various task teams and workforces to make sure that governments know exactly where they went wrong and what they should do to redress that. The process of ensuring the supervisory mechanism on implementing ratified conventions is a bit complex to explain now, but there's a committee of experts that reports, and it's naming, shaming, blaming, a process that is, unfortunately, we cannot send warships to countries to make sure that we enforce, but there is a mechanism, and I can tell you governments do not like to be scrutinized in this tripartite body when it comes to that. And so, of course, it's not perfect, but actually this is widely acknowledged, the best possible supervisory mechanism that any UN organization could have. So if I may just make one observation on this very interesting discussion on digitalization, which is so much, of course, part and parcel of the world of work. Digitalization should actually serve human beings. Digitalization, the only reason why we should digitalize and transit to this, technological innovations, is to help people do their jobs better, not to replace people. And I really would like to make that point, as you have also mentioned. Human-centered are the key words here, because we are a bit worried about this far-reaching digitalization and technological innovations, and let's innovate. And is it to make processes cheaper, or is it to let go of workers? We are very worried about that, and that is one point I just would like to make. And thank you for the question on the MLC.
Thank you, Let. In a way, it's also very good to hear that you are worried about it and addressing these concerns, because I believe in future it will be so important, especially in this three-party constellation that you're working in, to make sure it's not just the, well, let's just say capitalistic interest of the companies bringing in digitalization and automation measures to bring down costs, but really all parties' interest respected to make sure this human-centered approach is put in place. Are there active discussions around that you're engaged in? Do you want to give a little bit of insight to that, perhaps?
I think all ILO discussions evolve around that. Please do not let me misunderstood. Of course, digitalization is what is happening. I just heard in a G20 Ministers of Agriculture meeting that one way to attract youth to become farmers is digitalization. We are a bit worried about that, although of course it is part and parcel of today's discussion. But indeed, where are all these high-skilled people that actually, what did you say, the university PhDs on IT and whatever? I mean, this is not the way forward, of course. Maybe digitalization should be made more simple so that these absolutely well-willing workers are able to actually get the capabilities that they need to operate in this digitalized environment. Digitalization should serve the workers. That is the bottom line of that. Yes, plenty of discussions. Every ILO discussion evolves around that as well. And this sometimes skilling, upskilling, lifelong learning, we totally get it, and we are very much active in that. But this also becomes a little bit of a burden sometimes on workers. I mean, they feel nervous. Oh my God, what do I need to learn now? I mean, maybe I can't do it and will be made redundant. And so we need to take that human-centered approach in that digitalization process as well.
Thank you. Stephen, you wanted to comment quickly, and I'll keep a lookout, and you too, then I'll pass this around the panel, but I'll look out for another round of questions.
Kind of coming in on the Maritime Labour Convention, and then drawing the analysis between the different modes of transport. Because shipping is so out of sight, the employers group and the ITF probably have the most advanced industrial relations. So we have global collective bargaining agreement that goes across border. And that's because we're able to find a common enough path. Of course, we argue about what the pay increase should be and how do we move from fossil fuel to the new solutions, so much so that we have a just transition pilot hosted by the Global Compact in partnership with the ILO and the IMO with the ship owners. And what is that actually about? It's 30% of the world's seafarers are Filipinos. So we have to recognise that the world shifted from traditional maritime countries for a variety of reasons, cost being one of them. And we're now trying to reassure those Filipinos that whatever comes, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's LNG, whether it's ammonia, that their skills will be upgraded. And that is being done in partnership between the ship owners associations and the International Transport Workers Federation with the able support of the UN bodies. And again, I'll put on record the superb support we had throughout COVID of the ILO and the IMO. But in the end, you can only make a system, and if you don't police the system, so the ITF also has ITF inspectors who go visit ships. The great news about that is that the ship owners pay us to do that. We're welcome to look at that in other areas of ITF activity, because when we talk about investment, governments have reduced their investment in labour and inspections, particularly shore-based, which means no point making fantastic legislation which is all about a level playing field, which is all about efficiency and rather than transition, if people are cutting corners and not respecting the legislation, whether it be national or global. So for us, some of the work that we're doing in maritime is actually leading, and we'll have to bring that into the other sectors. And we're here this week, and we have a massive labour shortage. So on one level, digitalisation should be part of the solution, but it should be part of a worker-employer-led solution. Too much product placement in these markets for the sake of profit, which creates a massive challenge for unions and the employers to reassure workers that their job will be there in 5 years. I've been coming here 4 years, and we talk about automated trucks. It's not imminent, and only in some countries could you make it work. So let's be realistic and be honest and reassure working people that they will have a job, and some of it may be digitalised and some of it may be changed, and maybe the job can be even better and more flexible for their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Alberto, you also wanted to comment on this, not the maritime topic, I'm guessing.
No, on digitalization again, I think I was quite strong before, but I want to repeat it, and I think you reacted, and I agree with what you said. We need to digitalize. So many times we are discussing also with trade unions how we go, but I mean, it's bringing, for instance, automation on train control, it's increasing safety, increasing performances, increasing speed. So clients, passengers are appreciating, and we need to do this if we want to be in the market. For instance, now we have a huge discussion on ticketing, how to improve our ticketing, to be on your smartphone, being able to buy tickets going everywhere, and possibly integrating with other modes of transport. Definitely we cannot stay out. If we want to have our clients moving on trains, we need to be able to offer the services that they require. So we need to think on this, and we need to participate. And I agree with you that we need to talk to workers also and explain how we move. We have a bit of advantage, our age gap, because 3 people get out and maybe 2 people get in the company. So you have also a shuffle of competencies. And let's say I was part of my previous job in a company where we have done a lot of automation, about integration in railways. And let's say we didn't have a problem with trade unions. So the fact that everybody was guaranteed in their job, and the fact that there were new jobs, like, for instance, passenger will reduce mobility assistance. So you reduce ticketing offices, but you need to provide new services to passengers in stations. So there are opportunities to be worked, maybe not exactly on the same job, but there are opportunities and need to be useful in the company. So I would say we need to face it, and we need to go ahead as fast as possible, but talking with workers and considering that if we don't do it, we're out of market.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, involving those workers to see how can they redefine their own jobs and the company they're working with as well, and using that innovation potential really of your own workforce in the process too. Bruno, is this a topic you also want to comment on?
Well, I agree with what's been said. We have to transform our platforms. We have to digitalize our processes. And especially in our Latin America situation, we need to change the perspective. We must make youngsters see that this kind of job, that driving a truck is essential for the economy, is essential for development of each country. And it's been a hard time to compete with these computational professions. They want to be developers, they want to develop apps, they want to move to Apple, but they don't perceive the value of the transport infrastructure in the transport sectors. That's what we've been dealing with them, showing that without a truck driver, without a driver parking in front of the supermarket, you won't have any food at all. Then we started making some ads, some advertising, showing them the importance of a truck driver, of a bus driver, of all the industry of transport, because without it, we won't have society as we know it.
Please.
One positive point I want, train drivers today are much happier to run trains like today than 40 years ago, and they are proud of it. So controllers also. So you see also workers that are prouder of their job, and they will not like to go back to their job of 30 years ago. So there is a lot of positive in these things, and also on the working side, I mean, people are proud of what they are achieving, and nobody would like to go back, let me say.
It's nearly already a positive note to end things on, but we have a couple of minutes. It's very important.
May I just
didn't see any more hands go up. Do you want to make one more comment or question? Then we'll have that be the last one.
So I confess I've worked for a couple of governments, including at the Treasury. I'm really interested in what you've talked about in terms of making society understand the value of transport and the fact that maybe transport has been too cheap. But governments give out their money depending on the structure of the transport system based on cost-benefit analysis. So who is going to make the case to make government understand the real cost and therefore put more money in?
Is this directed to this half more? Would you like to pick it up, or Stephen?
Thank you for that question. Absolutely, governments play a crucial role and they have obligations. And I think actually governments, many governments around the world do understand their obligations and take them seriously and are working with workers and employers to make the world of work better, not just in transport. Other governments need a little bit more encouragement on that. There are mechanisms for that. I think what we have seen also during COVID, which is quite a concern to the ILO and also to workers and employers, is that governments are maybe abusing even their power and using the great opportunities of lockdowns to do all kinds of things that we don't want to see. Who is going to make them aware? I think the public and workers and employers and also other governments, this is how the international collaboration works at the moment. And it is happening, but of course not at the pace perhaps that we should be. It's very important to always inform government and call them out if they don't do their duty. And that is something that is an obligation for the entire world community. And if I just may use the opportunity, digitalization, of course, it's the way forward. And we cannot go back. And as Steve has said, many jobs have become better. The only thing I want to say, digitalization, human-centered. That should be understood. But thank you for that question also.
This is definitely one of the key takeaways of today's session. Yes, and then I want to kick in the closing round for this panel because we've nearly reached the end of our time frames.
So I think it's a great question, and I think we learned more about the inefficiencies of government through COVID and their lack of understanding about the whole supply chain than frankly I ever want to understand again. So for us, it is building partnerships with people that are at conferences like this, and it is the work that was done at the Maritime Labour Convention, which is considered, even though I'm a little bit biased, the best, strongest ILO convention was because, irrespective of what we do disagree about, the employers and the workers convince governments to sign up for it and ratify it. And that's a critical piece of work that we have to take into all the other modes. But we also have to recognise the difference between the different continents, because the challenges are quite different from the European Union to Africa to Latin America, and we have to be responsible. But we do have to create a space where the workers and the organisations agree on how we move the governments, because we are the experts when it comes to transport. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I would love to ask you each just to share one sentence for our closing round. As we started with the outline of what each of your organizations are doing, maybe you can just leave us with one sentence what the way forward is going to be, the key sort of next steps that you'll be taking towards these more equitable and inclusive workforces. Shall we, you've already picked up the microphone, let's go this way around.
Collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration. It's got to be the way forward.
I echo that. Collaboration, social dialogue, tripartite discussions, this is the way forward. Thank you.
Alberto?
I subscribe, and I will also add, look at our clients, let's say our passenger and freight clients, but I think collaboration, I subscribe it.
Well, I also agree that collaboration is a key word, and I would also like to remark that we must increase the perception of the social value of our transporters and our people who work for us.
Thank you very much.
Drivers.
Bruno, I think that was also really a key takeaway today. We need to revalue the workforces in the transport sectors. We need governments to do that. We need the collaboration of all the stakeholders in the field to drive it forward. And I'd like to thank the four of you for this very, very interesting discussion, and all of you for your comments and interventions as well. I think we can have a round of applause for our panelists. Thanks so much for coming to this morning's session. Very much enjoyed the discussion, and hopefully look forward to seeing you at the closing plenary in a few minutes. Thank you.